Welcome back, Endgame community. I'm Chris, and I'm going to be bringing you some players you should trade away while they still have a ton of value. Let's get into it. All right, let's start at the running back position, and let's start with everybody's favorite running back, Nick Chubb. Had a nice week one, put up a ton of yards, but not a ton of fantasy points. Nothing bad, but just an okay game. And then week two came, and he scored 3 touchdowns and went over 30 PPR points. This is the time to trade Nick Chubb. Look at his first 2 matchups. Great matchups, terrible defenses. He's got a couple more easy matchups, but man, his second half schedule gets extremely tough. And even in week 2 here, he barely outtouched Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt is still extremely involved, and we saw in week 1 how Kareem Hunt can limit Nick Chubb's upside and his ceiling. He's not going to score 3 touchdowns maybe ever again this year. He's still not a huge pass catching back. And he didn't have a huge yardage game in week 2. He just scored a lot of touchdowns. But Nick Chubb is just one of those guys that people always seem to overvalue, especially in fantasy. And after this game in week 2, I think his value is going to be through the roof. So go out, start shopping Nick Chubb, and see what you can get. All right, now I predicted that 2022 would be a breakout year for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and so far, I've been right. But I'm also going to say you should trade him, and here is why. Yes, he's had a great start to the season, and yes, he was a first-round pick, and yes, he's in a great offense. I get all that. But look at what he's done the first 2 weeks. Obviously, week 1 was a blowout. He didn't play a whole lot, but he still split work with Jerick McKinnon and still split goal line work with him as well. And then what did we see in week 2? Only 8 carries. Did have 4 targets, but he had no goal line work. It all went to Jerick McKinnon. And that's the problem for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's not a guy who's going to get 15 plus touches week in and week out. And if he's giving up goal line work to Jerick McKinnon or even Isaiah Pacheco or even Ronald Jones at some point down the road, his value is not going to be extremely high. He's coming off 2 great games. People want Clyde Edwards-Helaire to break out. They want him to be a thing. His value is the highest it's probably ever been, since around the time when he was drafted and he was going as the 101 in Dynasty rookie draft. So now is the time to trade him before he has that bad game and people say, oh yeah, it's still Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That's right. So go try to trade him right now. All right, how about Antonio Gibson? Look, great week 1 against a terrible team. An okay week 2 against another terrible team. But time is running out to trade Antonio Gibson. Every day that goes by where Brian Robinson does work on the side or runs or does ladder drills or gets closer to playing, his value goes down and down. And look, Antonio Gibson is not getting run on 3rd downs. That's all J.D. McKissic. So when Brian Robinson comes back, what is Antonio Gibson's role going to be? If he's going to just be an early down guy who's sharing the work with Brian Robinson, who doesn't play on 3rd downs. He's had 2 nice games to start the season. Now is the time to trade him before his value gets even lower. No, it's not as high as it was after week 1, but it's still high enough. So go try to trade Antonio Gibson now before we start hearing reports that Brian Robinson could be back by week 5. And then Jeff Wilson isn't a major sell high, but if you can trade someone that you just grabbed off of the waiver wire and get somebody back who's a usable drafted fantasy player, you absolutely need to do it. And Jeff Wilson is clearly the guy with Elijah Mitchell out for now. That's the problem. He's the guy for now. At any moment, it could be Jordan Mason. Elijah Mitchell is coming back at some point. And Jeff Wilson, no, he didn't put up huge numbers, but he had 18 carries, had over 80 yards, caught 2 more passes, had another almost 20 yards. He's got value right now, and people need running backs. Again, not a guy you could trade as high as CEH or Nick Chubb or anything like that, but if you could get a usable player who was drafted, in the mid to late rounds of fantasy drafts for a guy you just got off of waivers, you've got to take that every time. So I would definitely be shopping Jeff Wilson and see if I could move him. All right, let's move on to wide receiver now, and I think you have to trade Michael Thomas right now while you can. Week 1, 5 catches, 57 yards. Nothing special, but he did have 2 touchdowns. Week 2, 6 catches, 60 yards. Nothing special, but he caught a touchdown again. He's not going to keep catching touchdowns, and this guy, while he's still a good wide receiver, he is not the elite Michael Thomas from a couple years ago. And if he's only going to be catching passes and averaging 10 yards per reception, his upside is going to be very limited. I talked about Olave on my buy low video. Olave is starting to pick it up. he's starting to become more of this offense. Jarvis Landry is there. Michael Thomas does not have the ceiling anywhere close that he had back before his injury, but people think he does. This is the time to trade him. He's got 3 touchdowns in 2 games, and he's done very little outside of that. But people don't care because it's Michael Thomas. So go try to trade Michael Thomas right now and get an actual good player back in return. So Allen Robinson did bounce back a bit in week 2 and showed he could be a part of this offense. But there are reasons to be worried, and there are reasons to think now is the time to move him. Yes, he scored a touchdown, but he only had 5 targets. Cooper Kupp is still the guy, right? He's still going to command a huge target share. Tyler Higbee has out-targeted him now 2 weeks in a row. Maybe Allen Robinson will slowly become a bigger part of this offense, but I don't think it's ever going to be the kind of thing where Allen Robinson is a no-doubt set and forget every week starting option. And he's coming off a nice game, and people wanted Allen Robinson to be good this year. They can look past week 1 because it was the Bills and it was the first game. They saw what they saw in week 2 and they think, okay, Allen Robinson's fine. He's going to be a solid wide receiver too. But I have my doubts. So I think now is the time to try to move him, see what you can get, and maybe upgrade at wide receiver or at running back. And then a guy, I know it feels like I'm always picking on this guy, and I don't really have anything against DJ Moore. He's just so overrated in fantasy. And he caught a touchdown in week 2 and had a decent game. And people still think the DJ Moore breakout is happening this year. It's not. So take advantage of that fact and move him right now. He only had 3 catches for 43 yards. He only had 6 targets. That's back-to-back games with only 6 targets. Robbie Anderson, way more involved than he was last year. McCaffrey is healthy. He's not going to be a target monster. He's not going to catch a lot of touchdowns. And when he doesn't catch touchdowns, he's not giving you a lot of receptions or a lot of yards. So go try to trade DJ Moore right now while you can, while he has some value, before he tanks again and that value is gone. Talk about a bounce back in week 2. That was Amari Cooper from almost nothing in week 1 to a monster week 2 game. But it was a Jet, so you can't get super excited about it. And I still have worries with Amari Cooper and Jacoby Brissett. Kind of like what I talked about with Nick Chubb. Their schedule gets much tougher down the stretch. Now, granted, he may get Deshaun Watson back, but we're talking about a guy who hasn't played football in over 2 years. You can't expect Deshaun Watson to step on an NFL field after not playing for that long and just being an elite quarterback again. And people think, okay, fine, Amari Cooper can get it done with Brissett. He's got Deshaun Watson coming back. His value just went way up. Now is the time to try to trade Amari Cooper if you can. And then finally, this one pains me, but look, I'm trying to win fantasy championships, and if I got to trade guys I like, I got to trade guys I like. And that's Curtis Samuel. But kind of like Jeff Wilson, you just grabbed Curtis Samuel off the waiver wire. If you can trade Curtis Samuel right now for a usable player, a player who was drafted, you might be able to trade Curtis Samuel right now for a player that was drafted inside the top 5 rounds because he's coming off 2 great games. But he's coming off 2 great games against 2 terrible defenses. This offense is going to go through some down stretches. And Jahan Dotson, even though he's not getting the target share, he's a rookie. He's only going to get better as the season goes on. So as much as I like Curtis Samuel and as good as Curtis Samuel is, I think right now his value is at the peak, as high as it can be. If you can move a guy that you just got off of waiver wires, again, for somebody who was drafted in the 5th round, 6th round, 7th round of your fantasy drafts, you've got to do that. And then finally, I'm going to give you a tight end sell high because a lot of people are hurting at tight end right now. If they have Dalton Schultz, if they have Kyle Pitts, if they've been streaming, you might be able to get something from Mike Gesicki. He just came off a 4-catch game, caught a touchdown. People think, hey, he's not just going to be a blocker. He's going to be involved in this offense. But Tua threw the ball over 50 times, and Gesicki only got 4 targets. That is not being involved in the offense. Tua's not going to throw the ball 50 times probably ever again. Mike Gesicki is not going to be a target guy in this offense. They have Waddle. They have Hill. They do not need Mike Gesicki. Go out to some of these tight end needy teams, these teams panicking with Kyle Pitts, or maybe they lost Dalton Schultz today or whatever, and see if you could trade Mike Gesicki. Even if you get a bench player back who you might use on bye weeks, that's worth it. All right, so now that you know some players you should be trading away, you need to know some players you should be trading for. Check out this playlist right here, our Week 3 playlist. We also have Start Sit, Waiver Wire, Panic, Booms, Busts, everything you need to win your matchup in Week 3. Check it out.